Welcome to another episode of the CIRS Group podcast. I'm Barbara.
And I'm Jacie.
And today, as you can see, we have a special guest, Kendra Seymour. She is here with us today from the Change the Air Foundation. It's amazing work that they're doing. Before we get into all of that fun stuff, of course, our disclaimer is please do not take any of this as medical advice or even remediation advice, as we're about to get into. Please consult your own professional that you have hired for your specific situation. So, without more ado on that, Kendra, please, for listeners who might not know, what is the Change the Air Foundation and what work do you do with them?
Yeah, no. Well, first, let me say thank you so much for the work that you guys are doing and for the advocacy and raising awareness. Because I think when we first met, we all bonded over. We were both, or all three of us, were kind of unaware of how our indoor air quality, things like mold and water damage, can really wreak havoc on your life. And I listened to, your podcast and the interviews that you guys do, and I'm so appreciative of the
Oh,
work you guys do.
thanks. Thank you.
But yeah, I think it was because of my own personal experience that several years ago, I came together with two other advocates, Brandon Chapo and Michael Rubino, and we realized that this problem, poor indoor air quality, whether it was from mold or water damage or something else, was not getting the attention that it needed. So we created a nonprofit organization, we're 501(c)(3), that really helps people understand that connection between their health and their home. And, at the end of the day, we want people to breathe safe indoor air. We want them to live their healthiest lives. We spend more than 90% of our time indoors. And many people don't realize that the air in your home, I think it was according to the EPA, is sometimes, 4 to 5 times more polluted than the air outside. And so many of these pollutants, they're odorless, they're colorless, they're invisible to the naked eye. And so we're not understanding how that's impacting our health. And then I think the other challenges, and when I started my journey in our home, I not only did I not know that mold and water damage was a problem, I didn't understand how to go about addressing it safely and effectively in my home. And I made every single mistake possible. All the things you're not supposed to do, I did. And so after years of those mistakes that took an emotional and financial and physical toll on my family, we got to a point of healing and health. And I was like, I never want this to happen to another person. While I know our nonprofit isn't going to fix this for everyone, we do provide, these free research-based resources that people can go to, that they can count on, you can download for free. Because I always felt like as a consumer, I was getting a sales pitch half the time and I didn't know who I could trust. We can get into this a little bit later. I felt like every professional I asked had a different answer. And so I was just so overwhelmed and so confused. And that is just a theme I see so much with the people I talk to. So we provide those resources that people can count on to kind of take them step by step through understanding what might be going on in their home. And then because we know that this problem is so big and so overlooked, that we are addressing it from a policy and advocacy standpoint. So we work at the state and federal level to change laws. I don't think a lot of people realize that in most states that the person inspecting and remediating your home has no licensing, has no certifications, has no required training or anything that ensures that what they're doing and what they're telling you is really what is safe and best for your home. So we work at that level as well. And then finally, we do fund some smaller scale research because it's an area that we need to understand more about how to fix our homes and keep them healthy, how to heal our bodies. And so we came together to create an organization that does just that.
Amazing. That's awesome.
So, Kendra, when we initially talked, I remember we were chatting about your experience with remediation and IEPs, and I think you said that you've taken like every remediation course out there. And that's like, I seriously respect that because to your point, there aren't laws necessarily regulating a lot of this. And so what you did is you became informed so that you could help people better understand what to look for in an IEP or a remediator, which brings up my question, what is the difference between the two?
That is such an important question because when I first started this journey, I had no idea what an indoor environmental professional was. I think I assumed what most people assumed. I had a little, like just a teeny tiny patch of mold or water damage, looked just suspicious. And I don't even think I saw mold at the time. I think it was just water damage. And so I called a remediation company. I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know what they were supposed to do. And they just literally tore it out of my house without any kind of containment or any kind of engineering controls. I went on, I'm embarrassed to say, to make that mistake like a couple more times. And it wasn't until after I had my children who were born into the home that we were in, and I saw another water stain that I thought, well, maybe I don't want to just call a remediator right off the bat. Like I know mold isn't the greatest. And so I called a different mold remediation company and I said to her, hey, I have this stain in my kitchen ceiling. And she turned to me, or she said to me on the phone, she said, I am not your first call. And I was kind of taken aback by that. I'm like, well, what do you mean? She's like, your first call needs to be to an indoor environmental professional. And I went, what's an IEP? And so that kind of changed things for me. So an indoor environmental professional is kind of a general term. This isn't a specific certification, but this is the person you hire before you call the remediation company. They're going to give you that independent assessment of what might be going on in the home. And we can talk, I think we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like, but they go through your home top to bottom. And they're looking for signs of, mold and water damage. Some of them are trained for other indoor air pollutants, might cover things like EMFs. And their job is to give you an assessment of your home based on what's best for you, right? Not necessarily what's fastest or cheapest for the remediation company. And so you bring in that person first, or you should, is the case that I like to make. And then you can call your remediation company using the information provided by your IEP. So that's kind of the difference between the two, high level.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, it sounds, first of all, sounds like you found a really great remediator. For
Yeah.
the fact that they were like, no, no, you need to call an IEP first. So that's a nice like clue. What else? First of all, I'd like to know, what do you look for in a good indoor environmental professional? If that's the first call you're making, I know in general, we've had Michael Schranz on the podcast
Yes.
in the
Great.
past, and I've talked to Bill Weber recently.
Yep.
But what aside from knowing that they know about CIRS, which maybe
Yes.
is rare and maybe they're not in your area, what is something that the audience should look for if they are looking for an IEP that's local to them?
Yeah, and this is super important. People assume because they're the professional that they have certain knowledge or a certain skill set. And really the training among people who call themselves IEPs varies greatly. And so you're right, you can't just pick up the phone and hire an indoor air quality expert. So let me first, I like to start off with who you don't want to hire. And I only because I think this is what most people go to, because this is what they think it is. So I tend to put IEPs into three camps. This isn't anything official, but the first one is the camp who comes in and they're there for 45 minutes and maybe they look around and they spend most of their time setting up and taking down air testing equipment. They don't ask you about the history of your house. They don't ask you about your health. They're not going into your attic and crawl space. They're not like looking in closets and under sinks. And they just say, I'll let you know what the air test said, and that will tell us. They're so reliant on that single measure. That is not helpful in terms of understanding big picture what's going on in your home, right? Your home, we want to approach it almost like a puzzle. So then you have some IEPs, and this is group two that I like to think about. And those are the ones who understand that, hey, maybe testing isn't solely what I focus on, but maybe they go to a different extreme and they're like, I'm just going to use my thermal imaging camera. And if you don't know what a thermal imaging camera is, it uses infrared technology and you can scan a room and it's almost like you're peeking behind the wall, right? You can see where maybe there's missing insulation. And so you can use thermal imaging to sometimes detect moisture because what it's picking up on is temperature differences. So temperature differences might come from missing insulation, like I said, it might come from moisture. Maybe there is an HVAC vent or something that's blowing cold or blowing hot. I think people think that it's like a magic tool that like detects mold behind the wall, which would be so cool, but it's not. And so sometimes people will rely on just the tools. Well, here's the problem. If an area is not currently wet, it's not going to show up on a moisture meter or a thermal imaging camera. And dry mold or dormant mold that maybe it was from a storm and you had water in your back door. Maybe you had a repeated leak and you fixed the leak, but you didn't fix, underneath the sink where all that moisture had accumulated. And so if they're only using the tool and everything looks dry, they may be missing a piece of the puzzle. So then there's this third group, and this is the group I want you to try to find. And they're the ones who approach this like an investigation. So I like to think of it as 4 parts. They're going to go through your house, like I said, top to bottom, into your attic, into your crawl space. They're going to be looking in your HVAC system. They're going to be pulling out things from underneath your sink and looking, behind curtains. They're also going to take a thorough history of the home. And this is one of the areas that I think is too often overlooked. You as the homeowner know your home better than anyone. You will know if something starts to maybe not look right. Oh, that staining wasn't there a few weeks ago. Maybe something doesn't smell right. If, your kids have a tendency to overflow the toilet or splash things out of the tub. I have little kids. I know what that's like. So that history of the home is super important. So they're going to ask about that. Has there been a recent addition or even an older addition to the home? All of those things matter. They're going to take into account your health, right? For some people, if you're calling, it's because maybe you're having health symptoms. And they should be asking you about that. What are you experiencing? Oh, I keep having these reoccurring sinus infections. They're not going away. My doctor said maybe, I need to, if you're lucky, maybe you find someone right away who connects the dots between mold and your health symptoms. But more often than not, people aren't realizing there's that connection there. So you want to mention, oh, I did notice that, whenever I'm home, I don't feel as well. But when I went on vacation for 2 weeks, all of a sudden my symptoms went away. Or we see this with teachers and students sometimes. If the building at school or the building they work has the exposure, and then they go home for the summer, and then all of a sudden, the anxiety, the eczema, a lot of these symptoms they were having goes away, it's a clue. So understanding that piece. And then of course there is a role for testing, but it needs to be strategic and it needs to be targeted. And whenever you do a test, you want to know what question is this going to answer? And is it going to influence my next steps? So you're looking for that IEP. So how do you find that person now that I feel like I've painted a unicorn? Well, I recommend that you start with some starting certifications. And I will say 2 things before I continue about certifications. 1, they are minimal starting points. And 2, not all certifications and trainings are created equal. So to your point, Jacie, I have taken a lot of the trainings and they are wildly different. I think it's important that people understand that just because they have some letters after their name, that matters less than the knowledge and skill set of the person you hire. And so one of the things we developed at Change the Air Foundation, and this is free and you can download it instantly, you don't even need to sign up for email, is if you head on over to changetheairfoundation.org under our resource tab, we have free downloads. And I wrote a document. It's questions to ask when hiring an IEP. So you can start with your certifications, which is through the ACAC, and I list out a couple of those. And then you're going to get on the website because you can find out a lot of information online, or get on the phone with them and you're going to ask them these questions. And I even give you the answers to listen for, because I don't know about you guys, when I would talk to these professionals and I didn't know a lot, they sounded knowledgeable. They were using words, sure, like killing mold. That sounds great. I don't want it in my home. Let's kill it. I didn't understand you don't know what you don't know, basically. And so that is a resource that we have. And if you have those 2 things in your possession, you can become a very knowledgeable homeowner and renter. And you can quickly start to sort through who are going to be the IEPs who understand the health impact of my home versus the ones who are maybe just approaching it more from a cosmetic standpoint. And so that is a good starting point. It's going to take some calling around. It's going to take some research, but it's going to put you in a position to find probably a better person for your home than just picking the first person who pops up on Google or picking someone with 5-star reviews. Is you have to become your own advocate and do a little bit more digging and research.
That is amazing that you created that resource, because for CIRS patients especially, they're going through so much. They have brain fog, they have fatigue, they're in pain, they have headaches. So the fact that you created this easy to use, easy to understand document for people who are going through the worst experience of a lot of people's lives is just amazing. So thank you so much for the work that you do. We really appreciate you. So this hypothetical person we're talking about, they've downloaded the IEP, they've asked the IEP the questions, they found a reputable IEP, they got their report. Now, how do they find a good remediator? And what
Yeah.
makes a good remediator?
Yeah, and that's a really important question. I want to mention something before we move on because again, I made this mistake. I will own it. I made every mistake, and so if you've made mistakes, like don't lose hope. The reason you're hiring this IEP is because they should have no financial interest in the size of your project, right? If you just went straight to the remediator, what happens, or what could happen, I should say, is that they may say, yeah, no problem, I'll take care of that. And maybe they recommend a procedure that is, cheap and fast for them. They're going to spray something on it. They're going to paint something on it. They're just going to fog it, whatever. And it's not necessarily what is best for you, right? It's what's easiest for them. So you're going to take this report from your IEP, and now you're going to start vetting remediation companies. Now, I think if I had to distill the biggest problem with mold remediation down to one thing, it would be this. It's like the Wild West. You can talk about mold remediation, I can talk about mold remediation, and my contractor can talk about it. And we assume that we're all talking about the same thing, right? The same procedures, the same standards. But in reality, chances are we're not. And if you don't believe me, pick up the phone and call 5 remediation companies in your area, and I guarantee you're going to get 5 different solutions to your problem. So again, this is another reason why you want a good IEP. So finding that good remediation company, we have resources on our website too. I have a companion guide on questions to ask when hiring a mold remediator. And you're going to start with some certifications. Now, like I said, in most states, I could go to bed tonight and wake up tomorrow and call myself a mold remediator, right? They're not held to any standards. There's nothing there that's saying that they have to follow, X, Y, and Z. So for starting, at a minimum, we recommend that the person you hire follows something like the ANSI IICRC S520 mold remediation standards. And I say at a minimum, because especially for CIRS patients, those are who are mold sensitized, mold sensitized, you're going to have to find a remediator who is going to go above and beyond. So you can start by downloading those questions with the answers, and it takes you through what good and safe and effective remediation should look like. I have like 4 categories again for remediators, because I think it's important for people to see just how different this looks. So that first category, who I mistakenly hired one time, was the guy who said, you know what, it's less than 10 square feet. I'm a licensed contractor. I'm just going to rip it out for you. I didn't know that it was literally feet and feet of stachybotrys, right? I didn't know that even though I was 9 months pregnant and he was doing this, that I was putting my health and the health of my baby and my home at risk. And so that's one category, because, depending on what government website you go to, some will say that is an acceptable solution. I don't recommend that. The second type is the kind who come in, and we see this often with like rental situations, and they're like, I'm just going to spray it. I'm going to paint over it. I'm going to kill the mold. And what is challenging there is that anytime you disturb mold, you risk aerosolizing it, so sending it into your breathing zone. So you have those mold spores and those fragments and any mycotoxins that were created, or bacteria, anything that was on that colony now goes airborne. The second thing is many of those components that are created by mold, like mycotoxins and fragments, aren't living, so they can't even be killed. So, and they still can contain those allergenic and toxigenic properties. So it's not enough just to kill it. The other shortcoming that happens there, and I want to say this because I know there might be people, hopefully nobody on your podcast listening, who are like, I'm just going to bleach it. I'm going to bleach it myself. What happens is, and this is true for many products actually on the market, is you end up just removing the color from the surface, maybe remove the colony, but it doesn't penetrate below into where, the mold hyphae or roots have grown. And so the mold looks gone, but it's not really gone. Then there's the third kind, and this is where it gets really tricky, because at the end of the day, I get that it's really hard to separate the good companies from the bad, especially when they seem to have some of the pieces in place. And so maybe they put up some plastic, and maybe they have an air scrubber. If you don't know what an air scrubber is, it's like an industrial air purifier. And so maybe they're running that, and it kind of looks right. And they have no idea that not only is maybe the mold not being removed properly, but now they're cross-contaminating the rest of their home. And that's where it tends to get tricky. So then there's that final group of remediators, those who really understand that in order to protect themselves, their workers, the homeowner, and the home, that there is certain engineering controls and procedures. So it's heavy 6 mil plastic that's being put up. You're having support beams. You're having a second, what's called a decontamination or decon chamber. That's where they're going to take on and put off PPE. When you really look at what safe and effective remediation is, it's not that it's rocket science, but there is science and chemistry and biology involved, and it's a lot of attention to detail. So the companies that come in and are in and out, those are not the ones that you want to hire, because we're talking microscopic particles. So we have those resources, how to find a good IEP. We also have I'm super proud of this. It's called Mold Remediation at a Glance. To my knowledge, it's really one of the only consumer-friendly printable overviews of what good, remediation should look like. And it's got pictures and diagrams, and you can get that for free when you sign up for our newsletter. But you're taking the time, and I think one of the biggest takeaways I want people to take from this is research before you react. Because sometimes the only thing worse than no remediation is bad remediation. And I can't tell you how many times people have gotten sick because of bad remediation, or they remediate, and I say that in quotes because it can mean many different things, and are sick and think, well, mold can't be my problem because I already took care of it. And they don't realize that the problem might still be there. It might be in another area, that they're dealing with cross-contamination throughout the home. And so when you're looking to find a good remediator, you want someone who's willing to work along with your IEP. You want someone who's willing to follow at a minimum that IICRC S520. You want someone who understands, and this is in the question and answers, what it's like to work for a mold sensitized client. And I have several key questions in there that you want to know. Have you worked with people who are sick and sensitive to mold? Have you worked with families of children with PANS and PANDAS or Lyme or whatever it may be? Do they understand the level of detail and care that may be required to make sure that your environment, returns to, a healthier living one? I just gave you guys a lot of information. I hope some of that made sense.
No, yes, it did. And also, I actually really appreciate that you didn't go into the fine exact details here on this podcast. Instead, you're directing people to a printout that they can read and have in their hands and reread and read as they
Yes.
ask the question. So that's the best way, I would say, for probably most people to even absorb a lot of the information anyway. But it's fantastic to hear kind of the step-by-step process and like why the sequence matters and why you need an IEP and a remediator. I feel like you really covered like so much really important info in a very short amount of time. Holy crap.
I talk fast. And the idea is these are like downloadable PDFs. Like I want you sending them to your spouse or your whoever, and you take them to them or you print them out and write on them. And you have something that's backed by research. I do all the citations so you can say, oh, when they're telling you, we're just going to spray this on here and you're good. Maybe it's your landlord. You can literally point to the research that says that is likely to be insufficient. It's not going to go far enough. It's maybe not going to protect my health. And the other thing I want to say, and I forgot to mention, one of the reasons, I think sometimes people get hung up on this is they sometimes think, well, I called the remediation company and they came out and they gave me a free estimate. They looked at it. That is not the same thing as a proper investigation. And I know Bill Weber and Michael Strantz have talked about that a lot, so I won't get into that. But keep that in mind. That free estimate is nothing more than a sales pitch. So again, like you want to separate the two. You want to know that what is being recommended is what is based on your unique situation and what's going to protect you and your health.
I appreciate you saying that because I've been aware of CIRS for a little over 2 years now. I've gone through the treatment, I've gone through the Shoemaker protocol. I'm very much better now, but I kind of skipped out on the remediation part. I just fled my home. And so up until this year, I thought an IEP and remediator were the same thing. So this information is so needed and we appreciate you a lot.
No, is it okay if I talk quickly to runners? Because I know they're in such a tricky situation about the IP. So when you're a runner and maybe you don't have control, and you often don't, You may not be looking to remediate. Maybe you want to break your lease, though. Maybe you want to have evidence that your landlord takes you seriously. And so you may have to make the decision, hey, I'm going to hire an IEP who's going to go in and they're going to maybe sample those suspicious areas, right? And give you some direct evidence. Hey, landlord, this isn't dirt. This isn't mildew. They often say that, this is a real problem. And you can use that as leverage. If you ask your landlord to pay for it, they are under no obligation to share that results or that information with you. So as much as it pains me to say you want to be the one in charge of who you hire, you want them to be that good IEP, not the one who's just going to take air samples. You also want to be entitled to those results. And so something to think about if you're a renter. We have a great resource on a renter's survival guide to mold if you need information on how to tackle that, because I realize a lot of what we talked about may only apply to those people who own the home or have that kind of control, but there are things that renters can do too.
It's so important. And I'll make sure all the links to everything Kendra has mentioned in today's episode is as linked directly as I can. I'll put it, at least on the page and I'll say where everything is. I'll make sure that's happening. But if you loved this conversation, like I did, I know Jacie did as well, then you are in for a treat. This December, first week of December, 1st through the 6th, is the very first annual online CIRS Summit. It's at thecirssummit.com if you want to register. Kendra spoke there, and I got the privilege of interviewing her for that, which was amazing. A lot of great. If you love this information, that the talk that you gave then was just so helpful for including renters, I think, but anyone inspecting their own home. She really breaks down the right way to do that. And I just love that talk. I can't wait for the world to see it when the CIRS Summit goes live. So tons of talks. I think we have like 45-ish speakers, Jacie, right? Like it's a huge thing. Am I missing any important information about that we want to make sure we plug?
Yeah, you can register for free right now at thecirssummit.com.
Yes. Yes. And so to catch Kendra's talk on there and lots of others, Michael Schranz did one, Bill Weber. So lots of IEP stuff, but also a lot of doctors. We have Dr. Shoemaker himself, Dr. McMahon, Dr. Dorninger, Dr. Peg DeTulio. So yeah, a lot of really, really great speakers at that event. Can't wait for that to be out. So, and thank you again, Kendra, for donating your time, not only here right now with us, also all the work you do with your foundation, but also for the CIRS Summit too. Could not appreciate you and thank you enough for all that you do for the community. It's amazing.
Well, right back at you guys. You guys are leading the charge, and I can't wait to watch the summit. Some of my favorite people are on there, and so I like to tune in as I always learn something new. So I'm excited. I'm excited for you guys when that drops.
Awesome. Yeah. And before we wrap up, is there any other links or ways people can work with you or reach out to you that you would like to plug right now?
Yeah, so you can find us at changetheairfoundation.org. All of our resources, if you go to our resource tab, I mentioned that there's a free download section. And there's also, and this is my favorite, it's literally called Start Here. So if you are so overwhelmed, if you're in that analysis paralysis where you're like, I don't know what to do, if you go to changetheairfoundation.org, click on our resource tab, it's the very first pull out and says Start Here. We will take you step by step through the process. And I'm giving you bullet points and then things you can look into. I tell you what those certifications are because we kind of went over at high level. I link to all the documents at all the right times because I know how overwhelming this journey can be. And if I can say one last thing to anyone listening, other than my advice is to research before you react, is to give yourself some grace. This journey is not easy and you're going to make mistakes. And that's okay. Forgive yourself and move on. Hopefully, with the information that you guys provide, you do such a wonderful job. And through your summit and some of our resources, maybe you make fewer mistakes than I did. And you guys, and anyone listening, you heal faster and you find that healthier home or you make your home healthier because that's what we want for you.
Yes. And I should also point out if you are able to, but no pressure, but if you're able to, obviously you guys accept donations as well to continue the work that you're doing.
Yes, I'm the worst fundraiser. We do. So if you find anything helpful, every little bit counts. I don't think people realize that they're $10 and $20. We take such care to make sure that it goes a long way to helping people in our community, and really, helping everyone breathe safer indoor air. So thank you for saying that.
Well, thank you again, Kendra, so much for being with us today. We really appreciate the work that you and the foundation do. And if you, listener, are looking for more resources and support in the meantime, you can join us over at the cirsgroup.com.
We'll see you there.